Hello and welcome back to Refractions. I am Stephen Mallon. I am your host, and we are incredibly fortunate to have the Executive Director of Fotografiska, Sophie Wright, joining us today, Executive Director of New York. And we were just in the green room, and I would love for you to actually to pronounce the name again and just tell us the meaning and the history of the work, because I just learned something that I think I would love to share with everybody. And hello, Sophie, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Stephen. Lovely to be here. Thank you. I love how you put me on the spot with that. It's Fotografiska. It's the central part of the name that's highlighted, emphasized. It's Swedish for photography, and photography obviously means writing with light. So it's not a complex name. It's just Swedish, which is obviously reflects the founding origins of the museum.
What is the history of the museum?
So, Fotografiska was founded in Sweden about 15 years ago. I think next year actually is their 15th year, so 14 years ago. And it was founded, it's been in this very beautiful building since it opened. I believe if you remember, we had a couple of years back here in New York, a big exhibition by David LaChapelle. And actually, David LaChapelle was one of the reasons that Fotografiska was founded in Sweden. It was originally a couple of brothers that came up with the concept, and they held a big David LaChapelle exhibition. They're big fans of photography. Held this exhibition in a tent, I believe, it was a pop-up exhibition, and they had such a massive response to it in Stockholm that that then fed into the decision to open up a permanent museum for photography. So it is an incredibly popular museum there. It has a Michelin-starred restaurant. It's in a beautiful location on the bay. It's in another distinct building, but it's actually a big sort of portside warehouse. So it's a much more linear and horizontal building than this one. And they have a lot more space devoted to exhibitions, but it's a very, very well-loved museum in Stockholm.
Very nice. And then leaping to New York, the museum opened 6 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was in discussion and in the making for a while, but actually its opening date was December 2019.
Ooh.
So yes, a bit of a rough one, really. They opened, and then obviously in March was the pandemic the following year. They opened to a great flurry of press and media and exhibitions. But I joined in April 2022. So by that point, actually, really, the museum hadn't had a full run of 1 year open, in fact, because the pandemic meant that only certain parts of the museum were open. Because it had a shop, it was able to open earlier than other galleries. And they had lots of creative ways of trying to build audience around that. But they had a beautiful big Warhol opening in the spring of 2020. And unfortunately, that had to come down, and really the momentum was still building again when I joined.
And did you come over from the UK for this, or were
I
you already here?
I did. And in fact, my interviews were all conducted over Zoom. So I had not been in the building physically. I'd obviously heard about it. I've worked in photography for a long time. And I was very curious about it, but I hadn't actually physically been in the spaces until I joined. And my role was actually confirmed. I began the conversation with Fotografiska in the summer of the year before. My role was confirmed at Paris Photo in November 2021. But again, at that time, visas were all held up. I was also in the middle of curating a rather complicated show, which opened at the Saatchi Gallery just in January of 2022. So I was very busy, and the whole visa process was extremely complex, and that's why I didn't move here get here until April 2022.
Okay. And what is your history with photography? You just touched on it a little bit, but how long and Where were you before?
I'm ancient. I have been working in photography for 25 plus years. I didn't study it. I studied history and history of art. But actually my first proper job, I would say, I was a gallery girl for a bit during my master's at the Courtauld. But my first proper job that I got was at Penguin Books in 1999, which is a long time ago now. And in that job, I was a picture researcher. And I got to read lots of books, which I love doing. And I also got to seek illustrations and photography for the covers. And I also got to meet a lot of young photographers in that role and advocate for their work to the two design teams who were working in Penguin at that time. We were rejacketing the modern classics. So they were those, silver, I think they were originally silver covered books. And what they were doing was putting pictures on the covers without any overtyping. So it was a really lovely way to get work that perhaps we wouldn't have been allowed to use previously because it would have been cropped and fiddled around with. So I came across contemporary photographers and photography archives of various kinds alongside art. And one of those was Magnum Photos. So it was my first engagement with Magnum Photos. And then I went out from that role because I really enjoyed the work with the photographers. I actually ended up working for a small photography agency. And really my 20s after Penguin, which I was only there for sort of a year or so, I sort of felt that it was a great job, but it was quite a limited job, if I'm honest. And then I went into a little photo agency, and then from that, we opened up a little gallery. And then I went to work for a chap called Daniel Newberg, who had this photography magazine called Photography in London and the UK. That was based on the pocket-size magazines that used to be here in New York as well. There was a kind of, I can't remember what it was called in New York, but it was this amazing little pocket guide before obviously mobile phones. And it was a little list, it was lots of listings about all the photography that you could see in the city and around the city. And there were little editorial features and ads and things like that. And this was the UK-based equivalent. Danny was actually American, so he sort of had quite a lot of American contacts here. And I was deputy editor of that little magazine, wrote loads of articles on photography. It was my first time doing that. I loved writing. I hadn't sort of worked professionally doing any writing prior to that. Curated little shows for his gallery and worked with the designers on the layout of the magazine. So I learned a lot, got, a whole lot of experience. And then it was really when I was about 29 that the opportunity came up to work with Magnum. There was a role in the London office for exhibitions manager, which was what the role was that I went into. And it was just an email that came into my inbox and proceeded to work for them for 17 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I sort of worked my way up to become global cultural director, and oversaw, it was 4 offices in Paris, London, New York, and Tokyo, a very small office in Tokyo, and a network of agents, as well, helping us out. And covered exhibitions, print sales, some of the big books like Magnum contact sheets, Magnum China, that we did with Thames and Hudson, commissions. I did a whole series called the Live Lab, which was an experimental pop-up residency for Magnum photographers. I originated the education department with Fiona Rogers, who's now a curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Interestingly enough, because we were in the London office of Magnum, we had quite a challenge in terms of our territory, because at that point, each office had a section of the world that they represented, which sort of harked back to the very early founding days of Magnum, which is a collective of documentary photographers, for those who don't know, founded in 1947. And at that very early stage, the photographers carved the world up and sort of said, I'm going to cover this, you're going to cover that. And the 2 founding offices were New York and Paris. And then so London was a bit of a young upstart, founded in 1989, and Paris covered all of mainland Europe, and we got the UK, Australasia, and the Middle East. So it was an interesting challenge, but it was actually a really good one, because I got to work with a lot of emerging markets that were getting really into photography actually at that stage. And we were very creative about how we sold. We were less sort of siloed than our lovely Paris colleagues at that time, because we had to think very creatively. It was an opportunity to think very entrepreneurially. And I was always a bit of a generalist, so I liked sitting across those different divisions. And yeah, I was there for, I think I had the best job in the whole place, because once you're a Magnum member, you're a member for life. It takes 4 years to become a member at minimum. You become a nominee and then an associate and then a member. And that's a very rigorous process. And once you're a member for life. So essentially, as a staff member, you begin to work with photographers, you get to know them, they're there for ages. You know, you've done something for everyone. And at that point, you can really play. And that's where something like the Live Labs came out from my experience and knowledge of working with them, knowing that they could create new work in the 2-week period. And they trusted me, you know, because I'd been there for a long time and I'd worked with all of them. So it was a very interesting job. But the other side is that it was obviously a very distinct pool of photographers. In my 20s, I'd got to work with lots and lots of different types of work. I was working with, you know, a quite specific group there. And also, it was really only in the latter years of my being there that staff were allowed to put their name on creative projects, because it was very much about supporting and promoting and agenting the work of the photographers. So I didn't get my name on projects that I'd worked extremely I'd conceived, frankly, and worked or co-edited or whatever. And so I was very happy when I did leave to kind of spend time doing my own thing, getting my name on books, on an exhibition, on workshops, on, you know, and I think it's really that sort of 2-year period of being a consultant that then led to this role at Fotografiska.
Very nice. And I think that's when I first had heard about your name, because I think I saw you were supposed to be coming down to PhotoFest, and I saw that you had just landed the job.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think and you know Amber Terranova, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I had reached out to Amber because I was going through the list of reviewers, and it was just like, who? And just like, oh my God, you got to talk to Sophie. She's wonderful.
Yeah, she's lovely, Amber. Yeah, I really wanted to go, and then I felt like, I mean, I wanted a challenge. I was up for it. I'd missed working with a team. I'd, like everyone during the COVID years, been sitting in a home office, collaborating with great people, but remotely. And you know, I signed up for the job. I didn't quite expect it to be such a large team. I think, you know, when I joined, it was about 200 staff on property, because of course it's a combination of F&B, hospitality, as we call it, with the museum. And, you know, and I don't claim to be an expert in the hospitality side of things, although I think I know a heck of a lot more now than I did when I started. So it was a lot to get my teeth into. And I was also, frankly, you know, I moved my family here. I have a daughter, Percy, husband, David. We all moved for this role. You know, I had to find my own accommodation, get my daughter set up at school. It was a lot. So, you know, so the whole thing was really great, but actually I think I find the domestic side of it, moving to New York from London, more challenging than the job itself. But anyway, that's why I didn't get to PhotoFest, but I hope to get back again another time.
I'm sure they would love to have you. You touched on a little bit about the structure inside photograph. I'm gonna keep butchering the name because I've always said it Fotografiska. So
just keep saying it like you say it. Everyone says it like that over here.
Okay, good. You talked a little bit about the staff and the hospitality element of it, which is one of the things that I find really kind of unique about your museum. Am I wrong about that? Is that is something special to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, hospitality is an important part of what we do, and I've learned a lot about it, because actually it's not just, you know, it's not just about having, you know, a cafe, which all museums have. In fact, most museums have a restaurant, most museums have a bar these days. I think everyone understands that that's an important part of the experience of entertaining your audience, of holding them in place for a while as well. It's also about your mentality to your visitors. We think of them as guests. I think, you know, those that have come to the New York space can understand that that is quite I think it's more of a distinct offer, our museum, than others, because it's not a big white sort of cathedral to art. It's a warm and welcoming environment. You know, we have a wonderful team that greet you in our lobby. The staff, both the experienced team and our security team as well, are really engaged in speaking to our guests as they come through the door. And you know, that's an ethos that we carry through the way we treat our visitors. And I think that's a real, you know, that's a really contemporary way of thinking about the in-person experience, frankly. I mean, we're all in competition, particularly post-COVID, for audience. And I think people want to feel special when they come to visit somewhere. And you do want them to feel like it's somewhere they want to hang out, not just to be educated.
I think it is the only museum outside of like when there's an event where you can literally like go get your coffee and go into the art, right? And still
Well,
like,
this is the interesting thing, is because actually most museums, when they have an opening, will allow guests to walk through the spaces with a glass of something, right? Not
yep.
always. I mean, clearly, you know, there's, you know, very important collections where it's not really feasible to do that. But, you know, quite a lot of spaces do that. We have never had any incidents of damage being made or of anything to the work. I mean, I should say we are a primarily contemporary, we present the work of contemporary artists and photographers working, or photographers and artists working with photography. So, you know, we don't have like super valuable vintage prints very often on our walls. We do have them. We had some recently for Human Nature. We had a beautiful selection of works by Ansel Adams and others borrowed from Howard Greenberg Gallery. But you know, we're not known for that. We are, you know, we're not, there's no way we're going to compete with the MoMAs of this world when it comes to this object, the art of the object. But yes, I think we want people to feel relaxed and comfortable within an exhibition space. We also use music quite a lot. Music is a really important part of our experience. We don't put it into spaces if an artist doesn't want it, but we do add it as another layer to the experience. And we also have a very talented programming team who think very broadly about how they tell stories about our exhibitions. So they bring in music, they bring in film, they bring in, so you get a much more rounded view, because let's face it, these artists aren't working in a medium specific silo. They're, you know, engaging with the world. So it's a really nice way to give a more rounded perspective. And yeah, we want our audience to, you know, if they want to come walk around an exhibition, go, that's nice, I really like that. And they're not, you know, they don't know the language of the sort of art criticism. They can just enjoy it from a very sort of surface level. That's what's really quite wonderful about photography, is that it's something we all understand, we all take. We can't all be great artists, but it's a familiar language to everyone. It can be misunderstood, as you and I both know, but I think fundamentally, we want you to, you know, either enjoy it at a surface level or look for those hidden depths. And that's kind of where we're at, and the sort of perspective of the brand on visitor experience.
You talked a little bit about the team and putting together the exhibitions and the music and some of the other elements that are coming together. Like, how often do those meetings happen? Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall, like where you're brainstorming for like the exhibition for like 2027. Like, you know, is it like fishbowl? Or are you like throwing ideas up out of the wall? Like how, like what's the process like, and how do you like to do it?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, like a lot of other, what I would say is, I suppose there are some things we do different and some things that are not going to be that surprising for most people that work in a space like this. I think we tend to work probably a little shorter form than really big museums do. We can be a bit more nimble. We're not a massive space in reality, 3 floors, 750 meters squared in this current building that we're in. But we actually have a structure around our exhibitions, because exhibitions are the heart of what we do. There's an international exhibitions committee, And that consists of all the directors of exhibitions from each of the Fotografiskas, of which there are 5. And then in addition to the global director of exhibitions, who's based in Stockholm, and then people like me coming in as director, but with a background in obviously curation and photography. I'm not there all the time. And we also have our partnerships team, sponsorship. They come in as well sometimes. So it's really a process that is I think it's a monthly, and that's going to show that I'm not on it all the time. But it's a forum essentially where there's discussions and proposals, and it's really a forum to discuss what would work, what doesn't work, for people to pitch ideas. I should, of course, say that Yoram Maroth, our owner and executive chair, is also in that committee. And we're very lucky because he was educated by Larry Fink. He is very informed about photography, but he's also allows that, he doesn't dominate that meeting. He allows the team to essentially ideate and discuss things, and, is a fantastic collaborator in that space. So we have that, and that's really the forum for kind of proposing, because we have a combination in our exhibitions. We combine touring shows and local shows, and I think that's really important. So we have 7 or 8 exhibitions in our current space a year, and they're a mixture of big well-known names like Vivian Meyer, who we have on right now, or lesser known names like Elisabetta Paradina, who I'm pointing to behind me here for those that aren't looking at the screen. It's a work by she's a fantastic artist based in Germany, fashion photographer, hasn't had museum shows before. There was an originating exhibition in Stockholm, and it was brought here to New York, and it's very beautiful, very distinct aesthetic. And it's really nice to they're sort of our discovery shows. So, we're very conscious also about presenting lesser known names alongside of our more established exhibitions.
Good to hear. So there's 5 locations?
Yes, and one of them is a franchise, just to be clear. So we have Stockholm's was the first one, that's the mothership. And then New York opened in December 2019. And around the time that New York opened, there were a number of other places being looked at, because actually New York opened as a franchise. So it was not sole owned. It was a number of people and local people involved in supporting the business, including our landlord. So that was the formation of Fotografiska New York, and obviously now that's changed. We are now a centralized organization with a global sort of committee of international EDs like myself, but then also partnerships and various other things. Then we had Berlin and Shanghai open last year. In fact, very quickly, one after the other, September, October. And that was not planned in that way. These are both spaces that had been under development and discussion for a really long time, but due to various things, I guess, building work in Berlin, COVID lockdowns and all of that in China, they both ended up opening sort of one after the other, which was intense, let's put it that way. And I should say Tallinn. And Tallinn is a franchise and has got a wonderful local team that run it and own it. But it has the brand, it has nearly all the content comes from Stockholm and from the touring sort of roster. But the model is the same. It's really built with the same kind of ideas in mind.
I think this is also kind of, it's a unique and interesting approach, right? It's like the idea about the museum running as a business, less, it's still a public space. It's about bringing, people in, but the idea about franchising the brand into the international market is, I've never heard of that within the art scope outside of, galleries, outside of, the Gagosian, they've got 17 locations, I think. and maybe Saatchi licensing their name for other places. I mean, that I feel like this is the only museum that I've heard of doing that. Am I wrong?
I mean, there's also the Guggenheim as well, which has gone to, I mean, if you think about it, there's a few global sort of museums that have gone global, not franchised, but I mean, again, we're not franchised other than Tallinn at the moment. We are, the four main entities are all part of the same business and all owned by the same person.
Okay.
So just to be clear, that was how the original founders of Fotografiska had initiated the idea of an expansion, but actually it then consolidated during COVID under one sole chairman, Joram Roth, whose vision has been to kind of consolidate it and drive it from an international team.
Okay. So it started that way, but then they ended up, rallying the horses during COVID and just, figuring out like what's the best way moving forward to you know, keep the identity, keep the brand alive.
Yeah, and we're not against the idea of franchises, just to be clear, at all. And who's to say it might not be something that happens in the future, but there was definitely a consolidation. Because when it landed in New York, obviously when you have the franchise model, you kind of, there's a playbook of and a content pool, and you get the sort of all those resources. But I think it's fair to say that with the current building that we're in, it was fitted out without, for example, my esteemed colleagues in exhibitions feeding into the exhibition spaces. So there were some things that happened that are much better done with the expertise of the original team involved. And I think those are learnings. It is, back to what you said, quite an extraordinary achievement. It's pretty unique, certainly in photography, which is not it's not the easiest sector to be in. I would say we are, but we have rebranded ourselves a Contemporary Museum of Photography, Art and Culture. So we are quite a broad space for culture. Photography is at our heart, but it is broader than that. But yeah, I mean, I think that the centralized approach means that we can be smart about the experience that the senior team has and how we can support all the different buildings.
I like the global support network feels appealing because it's less isolated. And
exactly, which is also, by the way, being fully frank about it, was why I was comfortable jumping into this role, because when I worked at Magnum Photos, it was a very grand title that I had, and I certainly had, I had a quite aggressive budget to hit every year, and I was working on lots and lots of different things globally. But what I hadn't had the experience of was working in a big building before, and that was, part of the appeal of this was, how do you build a community? How do you build a community around a building, but also how do you think of how people use a building and how it's best used was also interesting to me. And it's something that I hadn't had experience of before. So I was obviously very happy to know that I was not alone. I was not a solo ED with a board. I was part of a group of executive directors that I could speak to globally, around, all in very different, geographies and contexts, but nevertheless people I could speak to. There was a support network, in other words, of peers. So that helped with any reservations I had about taking this on.
Yeah, that's one hell of a peer network to have, like 5 other international museum directors that you can call at any moment, and just say, hey, I've got a question. That's nice upper level stuff.
Well, I mean, look, I think everyone creates them. Most museums are part of museum groups. I mean, we all need peer groups, and we all definitely, post-COVID even more so, need to collaborate.
But
But
like
it's
those,
built in, I guess, to Fotografiska as part of its own little universe. I still, by the way, highly value external collaborations and peer groups as well, just to add.
I think that's the thing is that at least you know that they're going to get back to you. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily going to like say, sorry, I can't tackle this right now. And then you're just like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
and I think these, I think leadership roles can sometimes be a bit lonely, actually. I've heard that from others before when it is just you because you have a different relationship to your team, you have to, than if you come in, as a director or part of a group. And that was a new experience for me as well, because I obviously upped my roots from London to New York. I have got some friends and family here, so that helps. But that was another consideration. Was that you do have people you can have an upfront and frank conversation with about the issues that you're dealing with.
I mean, you found the fish and chip shop, right?
No,
You haven't found, oh, assault and
I don't need.
battery.
It's okay. I'm not. I don't need fish and chips. In fact, funnily enough, don't talk to me about tea either, because I've actually turned into a fully signed up coffee drinker over the past few years.
What's your go-to coffee?
Just our local. My husband's a bit of a coffee snob, so we do our own, we grind our own coffee and all that. But no, I have plugged into the British network over here. That has been very welcome, as well as my photography sort of friends from previous. I mean, there's a Magnum office here, for example, so I know some of the team there. The Magnum staff or ex-Magnum staff ecosystem is quite a broad one. It's quite an intense place to work, and you make very fast friends there. So I have that too. And then my husband and daughter both are dual national, so we have family here too. So I'm certainly not marooned. But I don't need fish and chips.
Okay. What is your what is your day-to-day like?
It's highly varied, honestly. I mean, obviously I've got quite a lot of meetings throughout my week I've got a director level group that report directly into me across the museum. So I'm having conversations with HR or programming, exhibitions, retail, private events. I have a GM who sort of deals a lot of operational stuff. We actually have a director of operations, director of security, director of associate director of experience. So I have to say, when I joined, it's like, oh my God, there's so many meetings. It's like, when am I going to do anything? I've got so many meetings. And then you have global conversations with teams as well. I try to get out and about. I think it's really, really important. Actually, when I joined, I had quite a few meetings with people bringing sort of my photo kind of network into the building, because in fact, quite a few of them hadn't been there before. I think Fotografiska, again, had a little bit of a slightly bumpy start to how it landed in New York. And my job as the first person from a photography background to take on the role was to really bring that community in. So I had quite a lot of one-to-one meetings. Someone fairly early on said it's really important that you get out and you are seen to support your colleagues within photography in the city. I'm very happy to have been collaborating with Photoville, for example, this year. We had our Vivian Mayer exhibition down there, a bit of it, to sort of support what they do. They're incredible, and I have so much respect for what they do. We've, again, a big shout out to Bronx Documentary Center, amazing space. We're very, very different from each other, but very different in lots of ways, but we've, tried to collaborate with them as well on things. And just, and then just, I don't get out as much as I should do, because I have to say that we have a lot going on in our building. We have programming on, 4 or 5 nights a week. which I do not go to all of, I have to say, and openings and things. So, but I think it's really important to stay engaged and informed about what's going on in New York. This is such a dense cultural city. I've got the Brooklyn Museum up the road from me, which I love, and I go and visit. A very good friend of mine's just become the lead photography curator there, Pauline Vermeer. Congrats to her. But I love what they do. I think they're fantastic. You know, and just going out to galleries and just trying to keep up with things really as much as possible, as well as doing the sort of management and the reporting around the finances and the strategizing around marketing and, you know, with the various departments.
That is definitely a full plate. I mean, my head's spinning, just like for what you said, from the meetings to the outreach to the events and managing all of that. It's a lot.
It's a lot, but I very much believe in leaving the experts to do their jobs. I mean, I am not a micromanager. I have a really great team here. You know, I've got people that were here way before I started working in programming, Wendy Wyman, Director of Programming, Jenna Barry of Retail. You know, we have people that started way before I did and who really know what they're doing, and I've learned from. And I really think it's important. That's kind of how I sort of summarize my style of leadership. Is it's like I don't want to cramp other people's style. I'm just here to try and create a bit more structure, I think, and a bit more strategy around what they do, and then to also help. Frankly, I'm a politician. You know, I'm also advocating and trying to support what they're doing to the sort of the international team.
Very cool. Did you make it to APAD this year?
Of course.
Good.
I thought it looked terrific, and it was my first time seeing it actually in its original home of the Armory, which was really great. I think Lydia's fantastic. I mean, that was another thing that happened when I landed into Fotografiska. They were partnering with Freeze, and I was like, why are we partnering with Freeze again? I really don't understand this. We're like photo first organization. We should be partnering with APAD, you know. So I made sure that first year, even though I only joined in sort of early April, we had at least an exchange of our membership with them. So their VIPs came to the tour of our space, and our members went to them. I should say, by the way, and I haven't mentioned them yet, and that's really remiss of me. We have 2,300 members, and we're so grateful for their support. They are a fantastic community that we gather around us for all of our exhibitions and our programs. You know, we give them access to our exhibitions and our programming and offsite programming and things, and you know, they're really important to us as a sort of extended community from the staff. And yeah, and so we were like, it's very obvious that we can bring them to things, and you know, others can, you know, we can do swaps of audience. So yeah, APAD, fantastic. It was really nice to see them like in a much more expansive form. I think we can all probably say that the other location was not as good as it could have been in terms of scale and atmosphere. But it felt beautifully curated this year.
Yeah, I have my misgivings about 2-floor art fairs. I think that the second floor people are always going to have, you know, there's going to be a drop in people that are going to make it upstairs. You know, there's a little bit of logic, you know, also about like the position about where it's good to be on the floor from the gallery's perspective. And I feel that the second floor, you really should be getting like 50% off of your booth, because I think that there's going to be a major deduction on the people that are actually going to like bother to go upstairs. But
yeah,
just my bias. And
no, and I just think, you know, the Armory is a really beautiful building, and it has a real atmosphere to it, and I think that really held the fair this year. And you know, Lydia brings a lot of energy and new ideas to the table as well. You know, we're definitely talking with her about programming together while we're in our sort of in-between phase post-building. For example, do you want to talk about that?
I would love to. I didn't want to. You sounded like you were honest.
Yeah, of course, I'm very happy to talk about it. After, I'm surprised we didn't go there already. After Vivian Meyer, we will move out of 281 Park Avenue South. I think I've hinted at various things about the current building as I was talking with you, and we're all very fond of that building. It's very beautiful. It's a landmark building, but it's got a lot of constraints in terms of the exhibition space that we currently have on. It's not, it's literally a quarter smaller in size for exhibitions than our next biggest in Berlin. It's also, New York is a very competitive market for audience. I'm really proud of the audience that we've developed around that building. But, it's undoubtedly a bit of a bumpy experience when we have a show that we're turning over for a new exhibition, or we've got an event on our 6th floor and people can't access the exhibition that's on there, for example. And, we have gathered a lot of data by our audience over the past, time that I've been in post. And I think we're fairly much aligned on the fact that we need to sort of probably find somewhere that's not hard, not so vertical. And this is Manhattan, but ideally not so vertical, with higher ceilings and more expansive, so that the artists that we show really can have the room to do their thing. And so yes, so we're in the process at the moment, looking at well, we are putting in place a program of events that kind of reflect our existing offer: music, artist talks, book signings, community nights for our members, and sort of workshops that will kind of be a sort of architecture while we're out of home over the coming year and a half. We also have a very large exhibition which we're planning on nightlife, which will open, we don't know yet, but the idea is that we're aiming for spring of next year, and that'll be in a pop-up space.
But we don't know where the pop-up is.
No, I literally was viewing somewhere today for that. I wish I could announce it, but we are in the process of looking at the moment.
Yeah, wait till the contract's signed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are, you said like high ceilings, I guess, accessibility, like you said, so it's not bottlenecking to get to the other floors. Like, what are the other, like, checkpoints, for a museum to move into it? So, I've dealt with finding a 2-bedroom in the city. I'm just trying to think.
Well, I actually really like Yoram has this phrase where he sort of talks about us being a bit like a hermit crab in a way. We sort of back into the space that we can find a little bit. Like, we do love beautiful buildings and distinct buildings with a personality, and I think it's a combination, frankly, of that plus this desire for a more expansive exhibition experience, which is really the two key things. And obviously, where if possible, the sort of ground floor and relationship to the street. Where we are currently right now is not the easiest from that perspective. We have got lovely big windows on Park Avenue, but it's a very strong stone building. It's very deep. It can look quite cave-like in the summertime when it's bright outside. And that was another piece of work to kind of like figure out how to message and to bring the audience in and make it porous. So, all buildings have their quirks. There's not going to be, unless you, and frankly, even if you do build one, you're still going to have issues. So I think we're pragmatic about that. But I think, the real sort of appetite is for a more expansive exhibition space, essentially, and not such a tight footprint with such a verticality, which does make the visitor experience kind of tricky.
Yeah, it's like I said, I've never gone, rental shopping looking for, would a museum fit here? So I'm just trying to, think a little bit about like the empty spaces that I've walked by, like, like that building. I mean, they're in a little bit of trouble, but in Brooklyn, in downtown Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Tower, there's that. But like, are you thinking about Brooklyn that a possibility? You want to stay in Manhattan?
It's not off the table. I think we have to be pragmatic and practical and open-minded in this process at the moment. I mean, it's a search that's underway. But you know, we're also obviously thinking about audience, because without audience, you're nothing, right? And we have worked very hard to build our audience. And put a lot of resources of time and money into building that. And I'm really proud of where we've got to. But, you know, it's hard fought for in this city. There's 170 museums, and that doesn't even begin to go into all the other entertainment that there is for people, you know, other sort of sources of gatherings. And, you know, so I think we have to be practical also about going into somewhere where we know we can build community. Either there's a lot of passing traffic there already, or there's a residential community that's engaged, or, you know, so these are all considerations as well. And frankly, back to our members who we care about a great deal, we would love some of them to come with us to that new space. And so it can't be a completely different kind of undertaking, or we can't expect that our existing audience and community will come with us.
Yeah. It's the Brooklyn people are going to love you, and the Upper West Side might have a little bit of a well, good luck on the search. I wish I had some help, but this is out of my area of any kind of knowledge other than
it's an exciting prospect. I mean, you know, I came to New York for building, for the experience of being of how do you really bring in the photo community to an existing organization. And, you know, and I'm proud of what the team and myself have done together. And now we're embarking on, you know, a new phase with a lot more understanding of what we can do here. So
very exciting. And I guess that you talked a little bit about, you know, getting out to see the work and the exhibitions and everything. What are some things that artists should be doing to potentially get their work, you know, visible by you?
There's lots of channels, aren't there? I mean, we talked about FotoFest. You know, I know people sometimes feel uncomfortable about paying to have their portfolio viewed, but there is a reason for that. You do get a window with an expert, an distracted window with an expert on your work. And it's also, you know, it's also about the act of advocating for your work, I think, in that space as well. And, you know, your personality and everything else. So you get, you know, that is a very personal interaction, which I think is still a very, I mean, I'm actually doing Filter Photo. I should give them a plug in September in Chicago. For that reason, I don't get to do these things as much as I used to do. You know, and I'm not running the exhibitions department. So, but I think it's important to make yourself accessible at times and still to do that. You know, people obviously send work through to myself for the exhibitions committee here. You know, yeah, that's okay. It's not, I mean, it's better to be sort of meeting us when we're out, I would say, than kind of like cold sending stuff to us. I mean, we get a lot of books. Books are great. I mean, you know, I'm on Instagram. I'm fairly old school, I guess, but I still keep an eye out on Instagram. I was very active there during COVID. I actually did a whole mentoring program on there in the first lockdown, because I was going out my marbles and I really wanted to give back. So I sort of did 45-minute slots for anyone and just posted it on my Instagram. And I think those things still happen. You know, I think, you know, social media is still a tool for access. I'm not recommending people hit me up too much there now, because, you know, I don't have the time to be that person at the moment. But, you know, and then there's places like, you know, Arles, which is a wonderful festival in the south of France, where you get to sort of hang out and bump into a very international pool of people working in photography in a very organic way. For those that don't like working in rooms, it's a much kinder sort of, but you have, I would also give the heads up, book that probably 8 months out if you want to find a room. You can get cheap, really cheap rooms, particularly if you're an American, I would think, with the currency conversion. But you know, don't expect to find a room if you're like a month out.
Yeah, not this year.
No, not this year for sure. But you know, just be smart about what works for you as well. I think do it with authenticity to you as a person and your work. You know, there is the space to do, you know, there's a personal engagement is always valid. I have gone on a small number of studio visits while I've been here, not loads again because I'm doing a lot of different things, but you know, there's lots of ways and means actually to access not so much me, but the exhibitions team and people like myself, I would say.
Good to hear. I know you've got a busy schedule. We've been talking. It's been fantastic. There's been so much information. So thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we leave for now?
Oh gosh, I'm all about audience, really. That's one of my primary roles here. So I would actively encourage all of your listeners to come and see our beautiful Vivian Meyer, Bruce Gilden exhibitions that we currently have on right now up until the end of September. It's your opportunity to see them in this beautiful, if tricky, building that we're in right now. And sign up to our newsletter if you want to hear more about our offsite program that we'll be initiating after that. So thank you.
Definitely. Sophie, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. It was really informative, and thank you just for everything you shared about the museum and you. And I hope, yeah, I hope we get to chat again.
Cool. Thanks so much, Stephen. Much appreciated.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you
Bye.
soon.